Lawyers of Reddit, what are some of the most hilarious, absurd, or ridiculous things you've seen in someone's will? Had a guy be extremely charitable when we were drafting his will. $1 million to his church, $2 million to a local hospital, another $2 million to the American Heart Association. When we gave him a quote on how much it cost to draft the will, it wasn't much because it was a rather straightforward document. He asked for a payment plan. He couldn't afford the will. Dude had no money. He thought you could just leave money to people organizations and the government would foot the bill. He was also the sort that became visibly angry talking about welfare and government handouts, which made his thinking even funnier to me. I remember reading about a fellow who wrote, "And to person X I leave 50 cents, with which he should buy a good, stout rope to hang himself with, and thus rid the world of his wretched existence." Oddly enough, stuff like this is a legitimate strategy to fend off a contested will. If you have 4 kids, one of whom you hate, and you say, $5 million each to Sally, Jane, and Doug, but never mention Mike, Mike could say, clearly this was a typo, and try to get his share. But if you say the above and then, and the only thing I leave my son Mike is my broom, and so he can shove it up his ass, it is clear that Mike wasn't left out. Source: my wife is gift, an estate lawyer. Always fun when billionaires sue each other over a few $1,000,000. Edit: you don't have to actually give them anything, just explicitly address your intention for that person. The goal is to remove ambiguity. Did a few pro bono wills up on the reservation. This big guy asks me to give everything back to the tribe because he has no living immediate family. No problem. Then he has one exception, his Vietnam-era motorcycle. Said it was the first thing he bought after getting home. Wants to be buried with it. I should clarify, not with it, literally on it, and in riding position. I helped him set aside the funds necessary to do it, and have a lot prepaid for. Dude was awesome. That guy is gonna be the coolest zombie in the apocalypse. LOL, in like 10,000 years someone is going up dig that up and be very confused. A good friend of mine looked after this old lady. She was his neighbor, and as far as he knew, she had no family. So every day he was at her place when he wasn't working. I met her a few times, sweet old lady. She had 3 cats that were here babies. Spoiled them to no end. Had a cat room for them with 3 separate beds and 3 separate litter boxes, bowls, etc. Well, one day after looking after her for a few years he walks in to find she passed in her sleep. Later he finds she named him in her will. He gets to the reading to find 320-some ladies there too. Finds out they are the lady's daughters. Turns out the lady had moved across the country unannounced a few years earlier and disappeared from the daughters' lives. The old woman left my buddy $19 million. She left the cats to a lifelong friend from her home state. Donated all her belongings to Salvation Army. Left her daughters each a single litter box and all of its contents, along with each a single $20 bill to give them each a last taste of all she was to them. Sweet old lady is my hero. Did the friend get the money, or did the daughters sue? They can't. She mentioned them. He is physically capable of receiving. If they tried, they would be denied. She left them something, though not much. My professor just said that he had someone in the early 80s that left his 3 sons and grandsons his extensive baseball card collection. It seemed normal when my professor first heard of it, but then he was handed a handwritten chart that had several hundred cards listed with the name of the recipient and why that person was getting the card. I leave this picture to Bobby because Bobby can't throw worth a damn. A client had 2 sons. He left a whole bunch of specific distributions to one of the sons his truck, gun collection, etc. To the other son he specifically left one thing, a poster of himself in high school. No idea if there was some significant sentimental value behind the poster or if it was more of a, "Look at what I'm giving your brother and here's a poster of me so you will never forget that I loved you less." In law school I once read about the Great Stork Derby. An eccentric wealthy Toronto businessman and lawyer Charles Vance Miller in the 20s left the bulk of his estate to the woman who could have the most kids in the decade following his death. The courts upheld the clause and eventually 4 women split the inheritance with 9 kids each. He also left a bunch of other crazy terms, including a vacation home in Jamaica to 3 people who hated each other under the terms that they had to live in the estate indefinitely, and brewery stocks to teetotaling ministers if they participated in its management. I read about a New York heiress who died in her 90s and named her 2 grandchildren in her will, meaning they showed up for the reading. Actually, what was written in her will was, "And to my grandchildren X and Y I leave nothing, for reasons that are known to them." For reasons that are known to them. Ice cold. Once saw a guy leave to his estranged son, "The sweat from my balls." I have an amusingly similar story. When my estranged father died, he explicitly stated in his will that I was to receive nothing because I refused to be part of the family. A few months later, my paternal grandfather passed away, and in his will he left what would have gone to my father to me because I was the one thing that Gary didn't fuck up. I'm not a lawyer, but I heard this story from a woman who used to work at a funeral parlor. Apparently, there was this rich old broad, ROB from here on out, and her family had been waiting for her to die for a bunch of years so they could get her money. Real stuck up, shitty people, and ROB hated them. But I guess she either didn't have anyone else to leave her money to, or she figured that her awful family would contest the will if everything wasn't left to them. Knowing how status conscious these shitty relatives are, ROB decided, fine, they can have the stupid money, but I'm gonna make them suffer for it. So when ROB finally passes away, her lawyer approaches the family with her instructions for how her funeral is to be run. According to ROB's will, the only way they get the money is if they follow these instructions to the letter. I don't remember all the absurd details in her instructions. Been a few years since I heard the story, except for the piece de resistance. ROB required an open casket funeral, with all family members in attendance, and demanded that her corpse be dressed up like Bozo the Clown. Makeup, red nose, crazy hair, massive shoes, the works. The family tried to protest, but ROB's lawyer had tied this thing up beautifully. Perfectly ironclad. They either attended the Bozo the Clown funeral, or they don't get a dime. So they did it. These stuck-up a-holes had to stand there for hours, glowering, taking weird looks from all their friends and neighbors as people got close to the casket and realized ROB was dressed like a fucking clown. According to funeral parlor employee, who had dressed ROB and applied the makeup, the best part of the service came when they tried to shut the casket, and couldn't, because the massive shoes got in the way. They had to bend these 24-inch shoes in half to get the lid closed. I never had the honor of meeting the brilliant, cantankerous old bitch, but she's one of my biggest goddamn heroes. Not a lawyer, but my SO's father was, and he always said his favorite story was of this old money lady he knew of. She was worth around 15 mil and had 5 kids, one of whom married a horrible man, who would spout just the foulest fucking shit against anyone that wasn't a white, rich, able-bodied, Christian male. When she died, each child got 3 million, except for the piss baby's wife. She donated that money to things like HBCUs, Planned Parenthood, the Special Olympics, her local synagogue, food banks, etc., because you both deserve to die penniless and hating each other for being awful human beings. Filthy rich man was the owner of 2 pet ferrets at the time of his death. He fucking loved these ferrets, and wanted to ensure that these ferrets were taken care of when he passed, so informed his sons that the ferrets were to receive all of his property. My mom only works for crazy rich people. The worst will she ever told me about was this old guy who was close to 90. He wanted it so that when he dies, all of his millions will go into a trust for his kids and his kids will never be able to touch it, but they can collect the interest it generates. So he had my mom set him up with this group of accountants who will manage the trust, and he specifically arranged a plan with them to manage the account in such a way that their yearly billing will almost exactly match the interest to be made. So when he dies, his kids will inherit millions but will only be able to spend like $35 a year from it. $35 that the kids have to split between them. What happens to all the money in the long run? Do the kids ever get it in their lifetime? When the kids died, it all went to the blood-related grandkids. It was really important to him that the adopted grandkids didn't get a dime. The blood-related grandkids would only get access to the money after they were really old. The story has a happy ending though. The old dude had a heart attack while hunting, died alone, but he was still married. So instead of liquidating the company, houses, and other shit to put in a trust, it all went to the wife, who 6 months later, after finding out what would happen to the money after she died, went back to my mom to have everything undone. The wife is still alive, I think, but when she dies, the kids get everything. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.